Hello, everyone. This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. New episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today, I have the privilege of having Alan Parker here, who I worked with on a documentary film for 6-8 months, something like that.
Least. Yeah.
The name of the movie is called Pros and Con Artists, The True Cost of COVID-19, and it's something I'm really proud of. So it's kind of a special episode for me, and we just want to share it with everyone. And Alan, I'm real proud of the film, and just kind of walk us through what your thought process is and put it together, because there were a million different decisions you could have made making the movie.
Yeah, well, I'm proud of it too. I watched it recently. It had been a little while, and I watched it fairly recently. And honestly, for someone who's very critical of their own work often, and this is the longest thing I've made. I do a lot of short films and a lot of commercials or promos, but a 70-minute documentary, I'm still very proud of it, and it still holds up in terms of the storyline. So I echo those sentiments.
What do you think? The process for us was we didn't want to be political, but we wanted to tell the story. So sort of encapsulate what the story is. You know, how you framed it.
Yeah, we did go into it not wanting to be political, and since we shot this, we started in the beginning of May 2020. So this is early days, very different time in terms of what everyone was thinking, or what everyone knew compared to now. And I think we wanted to go talk to people, first and foremost, and see what they were thinking. And then when we got all those interviews, then it became, okay, now how do we put this together? So lots of people make documentaries knowing what it's going to sort of look and feel like ahead of time. But we didn't have that luxury at all. We had to go talk to 20, 25 people, not knowing really what they would say or think, and then gather that information and then launch into part two, which was how do we put it together. And yes, we didn't want to be political. My thing was, I thought it was fair to want to know the non-medical costs of the pandemic, of COVID. And I think you supported that and you agreed, because everywhere you looked, and probably for good reason, we don't need to get into that, you saw the medical costs, the lives lost, anything medical, the hospitals being overrun, all these things, but no one was really talking about what shutdowns would do to businesses and incomes and livelihoods and families and mental health and things like that. So I thought it was certainly worth, for lack of a better word, paying lip service to that side of things. And once I committed to that, or once we committed to that, it became a little easier to tell the story with that in mind the entire time. Does this decision, plot-wise or story-wise, reinforce that side of things? I thought it was important that someone addressed the other side of things.
And a history of it is,
Sure.
I think we're also after, is 10 years from now, I think it will tell the story much better than looking back, because we interviewed people and their thoughts and feelings at that particular time.
In the moment, for sure. There are certainly parts of, statistically, this might not age well, just in terms of, we went to a lot of news clippings with deaths and infections and things like that in the early days. And of course, those numbers have risen, because all numbers will rise over the course of 2 years. So there are some things that probably won't age well, but to your point, I think what will age well are the opinions that people gave in the moment and how we put it together too. I thought it was important then, and I still do, to understand the entire costs of the pandemic, from the medical side, the lives lost, but also this other side, the economic side, which there's a reason people call it your livelihood, people's jobs and things like that, because your well-being, your kids' well-being, your mental health, your kids' mental health are all tied to your ability to provide for them and pay your rent or pay your mortgage and things like that. So,
and those costs continue to this day. I mean, it's also the inflation that we've had is
right.
Direct consequence from.
Yep, and I remember talking to an economics professor in the film. She's in it quite a bit, actually. Very knowledgeable, and we did bring up, this was again 2 years ago, so it's interesting to see how things kind of come back. We talked to her about inflation and who might bear the brunt of, the stimulus and the handouts and things like that. And I'm not versed enough in economics to know the direct correlation, but it is interesting to now see 2 years later and inflation is in the highest it's been in decades. And
Right.
yeah, we talked about it to her, remember?
Well, I appreciate you doing it. We have a few comments afterwards. I hope you stick around for that, but I hope you enjoy Pros and Cons, the true cost of COVID-19.
They send Hill in motion. Mahomes looks that way. The coronavirus. COVID-19. Coronavirus officially hitting the U.S.
The coronavirus on both coasts.
This virus does not respect borders.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
As the novel coronavirus made landfall in the U.S., an air of extreme uncertainty fell over the nation. Despite spreading in China and Europe for several weeks, the initial information surrounding COVID-19 was mixed.
When COVID struck, this was a big new thing. We hadn't seen anything exactly like this, and it was a crisis for all of us. We didn't know what was coming. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. We'd all been trained, of course, in PPE and isolation. We do that every day in the hospital with, different patients, TB and different infections that we isolate patients for. We were used to that, but what we weren't used to was not knowing how bad it was going to get or exactly what these patients were going to look like. It was a new thing.
I found 3 weeks in that I felt so unsteady and confused, and I think everybody has. And I think that's why a lot of people don't take it seriously. I think that's why a lot of people are taking it way too seriously. It's just really confusing for everyone.
So there's so much that we don't know still about COVID in general. Right now, the scientific community thinks that for those aged 18 or so and under, the risk is much lower relative to people who are older.
In the spring and summer of 2020, dozens of Georgia residents were interviewed about COVID-19 shutdown policies. Their backgrounds were as diverse as their opinions, but their experience made one thing very clear. This wasn't just a story about Georgia. What happened in your state happened everywhere.
You hear the rhetoric from Republicans is that it's not more severe than the flu. It's not going to harm people as we initially thought it would. And then when you talk to members in the Democratic side, it's very much based on science.
There are going to be millions of people dying, and I don't think there's any way to get around that.
The immediate risk of this virus to the American public remains low.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5%.
0.1% maybe.
About 3.4%.
Between 2 and 3%.
Down to 1%.
Around 10%.
About 0.6%.
An evolving situation.
Similar to the seasonal flu.
This is not the common flu, severe influenza season.
10 times times more lethal than the seasonal flu.
And we know 80% of the population is going to survive.
There's a lot of information that is not what the people originally got.
And then the news constantly changes. Oh, it stays in the air. Oh, it doesn't stay in the air. Oh, it's in your clothes. Oh, it's not in your clothes.
Airborne transmission.
It doesn't fly around in the air.
Sore throat.
Fever, cough, headache, and shortness of breath.
An alteration in smell.
It's more like a slow burn.
The fear is going to cause the damage, not the virus.
From the beginning, battle lines were drawn across political and ideological fronts. As conflicting information arose, society became further polarized.
There were mayors in different cities, or city managers in different cities that assessed the threat of COVID-19 differently. You know, when you got on those group calls, some people took it very seriously, and some people in different communities, different community leaders did not.
At this point, the pandemic has been politicized so aggressively, so ferociously. And I am fearful that this is because it is an election year, that it makes the stakes much higher.
It's become very hyper-partisan. And at the end of the day, it really should be about what is in the best interest of all of our citizens. And it's a tough situation for any elected official to be in right now.
I believe that there are people in politics right now that love their power and their position more than they love this country. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to maintain that power. If it means creating panic, if it will help get the administration that's in now out, they're willing to do whatever it takes.
The first coronavirus death. The new developments in the coronavirus.
Research suggests coronavirus had already been circulating.
Prepare for the expected, the unexpected, and the unimaginable.
I felt responsible in the job that I have for making sure that we were in the best situation that we could be day to day for the operation of the hospital. And thankfully, our numbers never got out of hand. We were able to keep it all to one unit. Our COVID patient population, the ones that ended up in ICU tended to be older and have coexisting conditions.
To us, Regency Manor is not just, a business. It's really an extension of our family. The first month was horrible because we weren't sure if any of us has COVID, so that first 2-3 weeks we would get the residents up in stages. So literally all day, the first month was getting people up, breakfast, lunch, dinner in phases, 2 at a time. So all day long we were eating. I really believe that once you've lived a little bit, I think even the fear of calamity or death or whatever is not nearly as strong as when you're younger. I think most of the residents have done great things in their lives, have traveled, have done, a lot of great things. And I don't really think they're necessarily very concerned or afraid of death or, which is kind of a nice thing.
My firm belief is that at the federal level and at the state level, this has been mishandled so intensely. And again, we were trying to work very quickly. Everybody's trying to work very quickly to understand what was going on. But it became pretty clear early on that those in long-term care facilities, especially those in nursing homes, were very vulnerable. And it is true that many of the deaths that have been experienced thus far in terms of the pandemic in the United States have occurred in long-term care facilities. It is without a doubt Also true that many of those facilities struggle to meet their needs on a daily basis completely pre-pandemic.
The White House and Congress reached a deal early this morning on the economic rescue package that dwarfs the entire national...
Throw an economic lifeline to businesses and to workers.
Providing over $800 billion in support for businesses big and small.
At last, we have a deal.
All government expenditures come from two primary sources, taxes and borrowing.
You know, I heard about the PPP and I immediately went on your site. Well, first round, they didn't have their stuff together. I mean, literally, they didn't even take our application. And then all the first part was gone. So then the second part of the stimulus came in, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Everybody's getting, you know, a bailout of money except us.
Right now, to this day, I get almost 100 emails a day about unemployment. And it's so far behind now that there are people that are at risk of losing their homes, you know, and losing everything just because they just haven't got to their name yet in the system.
Well, I believe that as finances are distributed, it depends on the priority of the people that are distributing the money. And whether it's nursing homes or not, they're the ones they're picking the ones that get the money.
I probably applied to about 6 or 7 places, literally. I would just stay on the computer and just apply. And finally, they did, ultimately. It was not what we were led to believe. I would say it was about 60% of what I thought we qualified for.
As you adequately put, the problem is choice.
As confirmed cases of COVID-19 began to increase, and exactly 1 week after 16 Gwinnett County cities closed all bars and restaurants, Gwinnett County Commission Chairman Charlotte Nash issued a county-wide shelter-in-place order on March 27th.
Well, I think the policy itself was sound. I think the county went about it the right way to craft a shelter-in-place order. Did it take time to put in place? Yes, but these things are not done overnight.
It was really sort of a joint effort between the county and the cities about the same time. My name is Kurt Yeomans. I am the senior reporter at the Gwinnett Daily Post in Lawrenceville, Georgia. They released a statement saying, you know, we're just going to shut everything down. And that was, of course, before the state stepped in with its own order from the governor, which superseded any local ordinances.
We came in at 8 o'clock that morning. It was a one-day special session to give emergency powers to Governor Kemp. And so it was pretty common sense for me as a representative and as a constitutional conservative that I was not going to support the unlimited power, but I would support the 30-day renewal because I thought it was responsible and it was reasonable.
We had to have a special session where we all came in during the pandemic, and what we had to do was basically give the governor his emergency powers, and in doing that, we basically relinquished our legislative powers. It actually turned into a 7-hour almost standoff about how long he should have those emergency powers. So there was one camp that basically said we need to come back in 30 days and decide if we're going to renew, and another camp that said we need to give him the power to renew on his own.
It came down to a vote, and everybody that said that they were not going to vote for the unlimited voted for the unlimited except me. You know, I'm not sure why a lot of people voted yes to it. I think it had a lot to do with fear of their seats, fear of their power, fear of retribution from the media maybe, fear of retribution from the leadership.
On Thursday, April 2nd, following in the footsteps of city and county governments and state governors elsewhere, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp issued a statewide shelter-in-place order.
So we had something unique for Gwinnett County that fit the needs of Gwinnett County. The governor's order, what it did was superseded all that and really trampled the home rule authority or local control of counties, municipalities all across Georgia.
It was never said how many lives they might save or how many cases they might avoid. They just wanted to limit the chances that there would be spread in the community in general. They didn't really want anybody to get the disease.
The goal to shut down was to minimize the spread of the coronavirus.
Really about healthcare supply.
A reaction to the numbers.
They're saying it was for health reasons.
I would think that any crisis would be just as big as the shutdown decision, and any crisis, whether it is a natural disaster, or, man-made disaster, or a pandemic. I would think that as a leader, you would have to make a very tough decision on whether to continue operating or to shut down, and always making a decision in the best interest of our constituents.
This is one of the toughest decisions that anyone can make. And then when you look at it, everybody was involved. There was no Democrats, there was no Republicans, no Libertarians. Everybody became on board and realized we've got to do something.
Specifically, the data that were forefront in that decision really centered around healthcare supply. So there's a lot of language that's been used about flattening the curve. The whole idea, of course, of these shelter-in-place ordinances and policies were to try to basically prevent our healthcare system from being completely overwhelmed.
I think it's helping the limit the spread of the virus, the pandemic, and that's what kind of the important message to get to policymakers is that limiting the spread of the virus and kind of stalling along until we can get treatments, therapies, and vaccines will help the economy in the longer run because we'll actually be able to get back into business faster.
The governor now issuing a statewide shelter-in-place order.
Statewide order for people to stay at home.
Stay home.
I think people are enjoying being reconnected to their families. What I found is that I'm able to get back really to the basics. And what I've observed is that there's been so much growth within my own 3 kids. I missed it working. I totally missed the autonomy that they've gained.
The benefits for the citizens is public safety. I mean, we're still in the middle of a deadly public health pandemic. And this public health is a vital function of local government, of county government.
If I told you, don't go out into the world, don't get any germs, don't associate with anybody, you might remain healthy. You might not get a cold, you might not catch any viruses, but what's that going to do to you emotionally, psychologically, or even physically? There are always going to be challenges in making any decisions because whatever decision you make, whether it's about a law or health or anything else, it's going to affect lives.
The social distancing and the shutdowns have the most immediate and direct impact is, of course, in those industries that require in-person kinds of activity.
My name is Norman Schultz. This is the Globe, Athens, Georgia. Currently the general manager and also a part owner. We've been watching the situation, obviously, for weeks before, and we actually closed down the 17th. The afternoon of the 17th, I believe that was the stay-at-home for Athens Clarke County, past their separate stay-at-home. And we went ahead and shut down, which is really unusual. The 17th was St. Patrick's Day, which is typically a massive, massive day for us.
Formation, Christian Payne in at fullback. He blocks for Chubb. Chubb breaking tackles. Chubb 20, 10, 5, touchdown, Nick Chubb.
Decided just to go ahead and close it down if it was going to be that risky to be open. Then we figured it wasn't worthwhile to be open. And again, the business numbers, the sales just weren't worthwhile anyway.
My name's
Terry Hanley. I'm the owner of Black Diamond Grill in Cumming, Georgia. We shut down for 6 weeks, so at that point we had to let all our employees go. We've offered all of them jobs again. I think most everybody knew was going to happen just from what the media had expressed and what was going on in the world. I think everybody knew there would be some type of restrictions in every business.
My name is Devendra Gautam, and everybody called me Gautam. I own this restaurant for more than 11 years. We decided to close the restaurant March 2020, and since then we opened for takeout only, which is in the evening, and we stop lunch buffet and the dinner dine-in also.
As the spring of 2020 continued, and with it the confusion and uncertainty that COVID-19 and the shutdown had created, a rift between elected officials and those they were elected by began to show.
What we need in this time is calm, sound, professional leadership from state and local elected officials. And I feel in Gwinnett County, that's probably what was missing.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found.
Working together, we can do this.
No, I don't think it's appropriate. And if they're withholding information, that doesn't seem very transparent to me.
Again, I'm open for transparency. In my campaign, I believe that you should open up, talk to everybody.
No, I don't think that the government should withhold information from the public. I think that there needs to be transparency.
I wasn't given any information that the public didn't have.
There were no hearings on the shutdown.
Public in the county level, not really.
It was just a joint announcement from the cities.
I personally believe that the responsibility of emergency management is, that's the responsibility of the public sector.
I don't think anything should be done for political purposes.
You know, the legislator, the policymaker is going to do whatever they can to protect their seat, right? So when they look at a cost-benefit analysis, it's in any decision that they make, what are they really doing? They're trying to maximize the probability that they get reelected, right?
It's unusual for politicians to admit mistakes because that would mean that they're not good leaders.
Politicians never admit mistakes unless you catch them with indisputable proof that they have made a mistake.
Here's a number. Every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people die. Did you know that?
No.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
It's the most severe contraction we've had since the Great Depression.
Today, a sad day.
Early really indicators that economists use, like contraction of output, gross domestic product, and unemployment, those numbers are looking really bad. So it's a pretty dire looking situation right now on the employment side.
3.3 million unemployment claims.
More than 6.6 million.
17 million.
1 in 5 Americans is out of work.
26 million.
44 million Americans filed.
What has changed for me is job loss, access to quality and affordable health care, a decrease of income in my household.
People don't have as much footing right now. Their savings are being used to pay bills, to pay rent, get into survival mode with their money.
There'll be a shift away from dine-in restaurants towards takeout and delivery.
80% of the restaurant industry jobs are
The National
gone.
Restaurant Association projects some $225 billion in sales could be lost over the next 3 months.
People are being fired, especially the people who are working at restaurants as well. I've got a couple of clients and a couple of friends, actually, who have lost their jobs. And one of their restaurants has closed down entirely, so they will not be returning to that job. The uncertainty of not being employed or not knowing where your next paycheck is going to come from or how long you'll be receiving unemployment benefits.
We're probably about 40% of our business right now. If we're just at a break-even spot or any restaurant, then there's no reason for them to be open. Then there's businesses closing. The economy may never recover.
In this industry, and us specifically, we tend to run, on a almost week-to-week basis as far as cash flow. So having, a couple weeks, at minimum of not having any income whatsoever. I spent a lot of time here with nobody else in the building, poring over numbers and trying to figure stuff out.
For many people, school closings in particular were especially damaging.
Athens is a college town, and most of our business is based around, at least tangentially to the university. So without the university operating, right now there's just not enough business in town.
This week, a massive football party in Athens, Georgia.
We have these massive, crazy event weekends where we have an extra couple 100,000 people come into town, and everybody does tremendous business for those time periods, and everyone in this area's rent is based on us being able to operate for those 6 or 7 weekends in the year to be able to cover our rent for the whole rest of the year. So if none of those are in place, no one's going to be able to pay their rent.
Digital learning and being cooped up has been a nightmare. Half the parents did the digital learning for their children just to get over it. I know I've talked to my son's friends, so the students aren't learning. So either they're struggling and guessing or online with their other friends trying to get the answers, or their parents are doing it for them.
With schools closed, many parents struggled to balance their financial livelihood with their newfound responsibility as teacher and babysitter.
If we don't bring our guests in, we don't make money. I'm gonna have to go for it. I have 2 kids at home. I gotta take care of them, feed them, and get through this.
I'm concerned about parents feeling concerned about not being able to provide their kids basic needs because they can't go to work, because they have to be at home to take care of their kids. I'm concerned about their emotional needs as well. A lot of my kiddos, when they go to school, for some of them, that's the only meal that they get. So many will not be able to return to work because many of them have small school-age kids that require supervision. So they can't afford daycare. They can't afford to have an independent babysitter to come in. So they are responsible for providing that care. So that's going to impact them financially. Parents like myself who have children with special needs are extremely overwhelmed. How they learn differently. Well, I'm not trained in special education. So it poses some different challenges.
I would say that in-person learning is without a doubt preferable. So when you take a child out of a school, particularly a child with certain needs, whether they be instructional needs or economic needs or medical needs, you do shut down that avenue. Schools are essential for the overall future of this country. If you're going to compete in today's worldwide marketplace, you have got to be armed with an educated workforce, period.
And we know how important school is. You know, that you can't retroactively correct stupid. You can't retroactively, you know, get a kid back on a reading level, right? Especially in 3rd and 4th grade. So I often wonder, did we take the best approach when it came to public education responding to COVID?
When you say, let's just shut down the schools, it's not, oh boy, the kids get more time off, you know, and the kids don't have the social interaction that they need. They're not learning.
It's almost like taking a person, you know, putting somebody in jail.
It's got to have an impact when children are isolated from their peers over an extended period of time. I can't imagine what it's, you know, the impact would be on a 7 or 8 year old child sitting at home, and then the parents are, you know, trying to keep body and soul together and working and dealing with child care and what have you. It's got to be an awfully strenuous environment. Got to be.
When you think about things that are stressful in people's lives, it's the unknown and the unpredictable and things that don't have a timeline. My name is Dr. Wendy Dickinson. I'm a licensed psychologist and the director at Grow Counseling. We've had a collective traumatic experience, and that doesn't just go away. Most people at some point in their life will have suicidal thoughts. It's a pretty normal experience, even though we don't talk about it a whole lot. So a lot of times that can come from an ongoing mental health issue like depression or anxiety. Sometimes it can come from situations when people just feel overwhelmed.
Being at home and being in stressful situations, be it with a partner or a job, or just the stress of the environment in general, just of our society, has led to an increase in substance use, most certainly. My name is Isom White. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I can't speak to whether or not we'll see a rise and a fall or a rise in suicide attempts. You know, given the stress that, you know, some people are going to have to endure, and then if they've already got you know, an underlying depressive disorder that may be going untreated because they can't receive services because they've lost their health insurance or they can't afford the rates of a therapist, well, then I think that maybe increases their risk.
Spousal abuse is at an all-time high. Why aren't we talking about suicides? I know my son, he's in the Army. Somebody committed suicide at his base a couple weeks ago.
Your mental health impacts everything that you do. You have a psychopathology that impacts all of your behaviors. So if we are aware that mental health is important, it makes absolutely no sense for us to react and wait for situations to occur to then respond.
Anytime we have a family unit or family system where the stress is increased, it causes other kinds of fallouts. So I think for families and couples, whether they have children or not, there are significant impacts around financial stress, underemployment, unemployment. It can lead to depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation.
I think that there's going to be some mental strain there because of the order. And a lot of people, a lot of families didn't have the necessary skills to cope with that situation. Anytime that you have an economical downturn, you're gonna see an increase or an uptick in crime. I think we're gonna see some residuals from people, as we do start to open back up, that there's going to be some things that has manifested with people that we probably are not on top of right now.
Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter protesters square off.
Witnesses say they heard at least 3 gunshots before spotting a victim on the ground.
You can see police here now firing tear gas.
The nation erupted into scenes of chaos.
Portland police say 10 people were arrested following last night's protests.
Another huge turnout for the second day. Thousands of protesters out in force.
The flip side to families being together, unfortunately, I have a lot of kiddos that I work with who don't reside in safe households. They don't reside in safe communities. There's been an increase in domestic violence calls. I had a woman who I was providing counseling for via telehealth, and she was signaling to me that she was in a dangerous situation. And it was a struggle and somewhat chaotic just to be able to get first responders to her household to ensure her safety. There's been some new additions to the families, and if you got families that live across state or across the country, like my father, I can't get to. So that's emotionally hard for us as a family. And when you couple that with health problems, so my father's elderly and he has health problems, I'm his primary caregiver, it is a struggle getting him to doctor's appointments. It is a struggle contacting and making those arrangements for him.
If you don't go to the doctor because you're afraid, or because the doctor's office is closed, or you don't get your treatment, you don't go to your dialysis, you don't do it, you're increasing the chances of either getting sicker or dying. That's what the shutdown has caused.
The hospital did, pretty much across the country, from what I understand, stop doing elective procedures. Particularly people with stroke symptoms and chest pain not coming in. We did see some people that had chest pain and should have come in immediately and waited, and there was nationally a rise in strokes and heart attacks. I got a call from a friend whose husband had fallen, passed out, filleted his face open, and she was afraid to come bring him to the emergency room, and he obviously needed to come.
So when it comes to the issue of elective surgeries and the fact that many hospitals discontinued elective surgeries, and the word elective here is a little bit misleading because it doesn't mean that the surgery was actually not important or couldn't save a life. I'm sure that there were lives lost over that. We don't have the data. Those data are being made available in real time. But what I can tell you is that you have to consider where the locus of authority is in the decisions around preventing elective surgeries. And those decisions are typically made by the healthcare systems themselves.
My understanding was it was just internally from the hospitals themselves wanting to get ahead.
Those instructions have come from the association, the American Pediatric Association or the American Dental Association.
When the governor passed his shelter-in-place order, it prevented certain healthcare professionals from doing certain work.
I don't know where the directive to stop the elective surgeries came from.
A growing disconnect in overall experience began to manifest. As the difference in people's individual environments were exposed, so too was the overall cost they had and would continue to pay.
What I've been able to do is have conversations with people who seem disconnected, and what I've noticed is that the only thing about their lives that changed was being able to visit family and friends. They were able to pay their bills on time. They were still able to feed their families. They didn't lose access to quality, affordable health care.
In a written statement, Gwinnett County Commission Chairman Charlotte Nash thanked businesses and residents for their temporary sacrifices.
I think citizens were making temporary sacrifices with activities such as going to the barbershop, nail salons, grocery stores, being out in public, attending some of our, parks and recreation and beaches and that kind of thing. I think they had to make temporary sacrifices.
The sacrifices that Americans are experiencing, these sacrifices are significant and they are not temporary. I think any elected leader needs to take this seriously, and I think the residents and the voters will respect you more for taking it seriously.
It's not temporary. When you lose your job, when you commit suicide, the suicide rate went up, the divorce rate ran up, the alcoholism rate went up. Those are not temporary situations. And not to mention the number of people that lost their businesses and they put their life savings into those businesses. That's not temporary.
Almost finished with the potential disasters, where scenario is either quicksand, spontaneous combustion.
There's a part of our brain that is the most primal part of our brain that keeps us alive. It's the part that jumps out of the way when we drop a knife before we even realize that we've dropped the knife or the pair of scissors. So we're constantly hardwired for survival. And that part of our brain is largely driven by fear. Fear is one of the indicators that tells us, hey, something's not safe here, we might not be okay, and need to change the situation. And so unless we're really in touch with how we're feeling and paying attention to the way that the fear is motivating us, we're most likely to make decisions from a fear-based perspective.
If you are fearful for your life or for your livelihood, it may cause you to react first without maybe thinking or considering the logic or the numbers or the science or the statistics.
If a person catches it, then there's one of three things are going to happen. You're either going to be asymptomatic, well, I'll say four things. You're going to be asymptomatic, you're going to have mild symptoms, you're going to have really, really bad symptoms that might be life-threatening, or you might die from the virus. And unfortunately, what we've seen with this virus is that part is a lottery.
We have been taking it very seriously.
I think it's a very serious issue.
So there's a gamble in this.
Clear and convincing evidence.
Putting up my own guidelines.
It's better to be safe than sorry.
If we overreact, and thank God we overreacted.
How serious is it?
As we get more data going forward,
It's just so much higher.
It's a roller coaster ride.
The likelihood versus the possibility are two different things.
Because you never know what you don't know.
Always based on data.
The whole idea, well, children barely, get very sick, or if they do get sick, they don't die. And the numbers don't show that.
I absolutely believe that the media, local, national, is pandering to a certain group of people, and it's amazing how many of the people that run these different news organizations are related through marriage or business or some other way to the politicians that want to see the present president and others out. It's just amazing to see that, and to publish information to cause panic, disruption, and disrupt people's lives the way that they have. I think it's criminal.
Fear, I think it's fear-driven and emotional. And I didn't know Americans were so scared. And I'm like, wow, it's just really, the percentage is it's just so low. I'm sure there's people that legitimately died. I'm not saying that. And I'm not discrediting the life of the people that love them, okay? But people die every day. And now you crush our economy. It's not about money. It's not that they don't care. You crush families. People are gonna be homeless because of this. People are gonna lose their homes. People are gonna be on the streets. You're putting women, men, and children on the streets. They played off our fear and people's emotion. The fear is, oh my God, you're gonna die, you're gonna die, you're gonna die. And the emotion is, if you don't stay home and stay safe, you don't care about other people.
Many began to see the media as a chief contributor to the country's divisiveness.
I mean, even locally, we get people who, they just don't like us reporting the numbers because they think we're overplaying it. They believe we're blowing out of proportion. I mean, that's essentially it. The liberal media wants to shut everything down in their collusion with the Democrats and blow us out of proportion.
Deaths are rising in at least 17 states. One day this week, there was a death nearly every minute.
The worsening coronavirus outbreak. Here are the very latest details this morning.
In the nation's 3 most populous states, things are going from bad to worse.
That's exactly what they did, and we fell right in line. And I've expected more from. I thought more people, maybe people aren't such free thinkers. Maybe people are so in tune to what they're told.
One of the things that I talk to clients a lot about is that what we focus on grows, and our brain actually doesn't know the difference between what's real and what we imagine. So when there's a stressor out there and we focus on it and we imagine that there's this invisible monster that's going to get us, and we stay focused on that, it continues to grow, and our body actually responds biochemically as if there's a real monster out there.
I think one thing that people could do in terms of, I guess, in a response to the reactionary part of fear is to practice being comfortable with fear, practice sitting with it, practice sitting with the bodily experience of fear. So what does that fear feel like in your body, and how can you maybe withstand, or like I use the term, sit with, how can you sit with that fear for an extended period of time?
This is a once-in-a-lifetime situation that we're in.
With COVID-19, I think we've never had this before.
The year was 1957. Elvis was entertaining the masses, and I Love Lucy was airing its final episode. New advances in science and technology were capturing the attention of Americans everywhere. And while local industries boomed, something else was happening. A new strain of the influenza virus was killing 116,000 Americans. Like COVID-19, it was especially dangerous to the elderly population. But in a frightening twist, the virus could be fatal to pregnant women as well. The U.S. population was half its current size, and life expectancy was nearly 10 years less. However, without a 24-hour news cycle, hungry for eyeballs hardly anyone noticed, and next to nothing was shut down. Other than a renewed commitment to basic hygiene, American life went on as usual.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that. I do remember flu epidemics that popped up from time to time, but I don't remember that specific one. But I honestly do not recall anything unusual taking place around my home or in my school associated with it.
Again, years back, a few years ago, was it the H1N1, the swine flu? It was killing people. The avian bird flu was killing people. And what was scaring me to death is that one year it was killing little kids. And that's all the world news was scaring me about. And I had 2 younger ones. They were younger then. Scared me to death at night nearly. And eventually, guess what? It fades away because Hawaii has a volcano and starts erupting, and no more you hear about the flu. It just goes away. So sometimes I wonder, does media like to blow it up too much? Or do they give us too much, too little?
We begin tonight with a stunning number, 150,000.
Deaths from coronavirus in the United States have surpassed 160,000.
Total U.S. death toll now nearing 170,000.
In the United States, around 3 million people die on average every year. The death rate is just under 900 deaths per 100,000 people in the population. Life expectancy currently stands at 78.6 years, and the infant mortality rate is about 6 deaths per 1,000 live births. The leading causes of death in the U.S. are heart disease and cancer, with over 1 million on average combined. Other common causes include accidents with about 170,000 deaths every year and chronic lower respiratory disease with 160,000. About 150,000 people die every year from stroke. And Alzheimer's disease kills about 120,000 Americans every 12 months. Over 80,000 people perish yearly from diabetes. And the flu and pneumonia send almost 60,000 people to their ultimate demise over the course of 52 weeks. And finally, suicide results in under 50,000 fatalities annually.
The numbers aren't even close to correct. I have yet to meet one person, and I talk a lot to a lot of people. I ask every single person, do they personally know somebody that's died of COVID-19? And nobody can say yes.
Adding to an already full load of problems, many people also began to grow suspicious of reported cases and deaths.
My mechanic, his name is Sal, his aunt just died of some type of terminal cancer. They put her down for COVID-19, didn't test her for COVID-19.
It's interesting. I've had a few people pass away, not because of COVID, but they've been marked as COVID deaths. I don't know anyone personally who's had it. I know people who had some symptoms, and we've kind of assumed that's probably what it was. A friend of mine, he was, I believe, in his 60s. He had a heart attack. He was very healthy. He was making a veggie smoothie for him and his wife and his paraplegic son, and he had a heart attack. And they tested him and his wife, his body. They tested his body, and he was positive, and so was she. They took another test and they were negative, but they listed him as a COVID death, and therefore the funeral, she couldn't be touched, she couldn't receive hugs, she had a mask on, everybody was uncomfortable, and they have discontinued her food train. She's not receiving any dinners. It's just really, I'm actually getting emotional. I haven't cried about this yet, but it's just frustrating. The hospitals are getting money for every COVID death. I think just, to cover whatever the finances are to put people on ventilators, etc., which I've actually read that they put people on ventilators before they die just to prove that they treated someone for COVID, and that actually decreases your chance of survival because you're depending on that machine.
Another friend of mine, her nephew died in a car wreck in New York, 20 years old, and they put him down for COVID-19. Everyone knows FEMA's giving the hospital, $2,500, $3,500 for every case they say is COVID-19.
So I have a friend in Arizona who's, my sister was talking to the other day, and she said that her friend's husband clearly retired with serious heart issues. Went to the hospital with having a hard time breathing, but as I said, very, very compromised with his heart. He died. They tested him, he had COVID. He died, they say of COVID, his wife says with COVID. Slight difference, but but in his case, they really thought that if it wasn't gonna be this, would have been something else pretty quickly.
So my wife's stepfather's father passed away. He was in a retirement home in Gainesville, and they had an outbreak in the retirement home, and he passed away last week.
Maybe a couple of patients that I checked out of the morgue that I said, okay, well, we never got a positive, but we're calling it a COVID death. We didn't always trust the test. You can't risk, that a test wasn't correct. You have to assume.
A lot of the information that I've obtained basically says that if you die of a heart attack, but you have tested positive for COVID, you died from COVID.
I can speak to some of the cynicism that people may feel. I know that Georgia Department of Public Health has been criticized recently. It made its way in the national news by putting out misleading, we'll say, maybe just outright say blanket false graphs or information coming from state government.
What the reasoning is, I'm not sure. Some say it's financial, some say it's political. I don't know what the reasoning is, but I know that a lot of deaths have been attributed to COVID that weren't COVID.
If you ever can make yourself appear the hero, and there are some financial benefits to that, I think that's a good incentive for people.
I don't have any personal or professional experience, but I have had conversations with other colleagues, medical and clinical colleagues. And COVID was listed as the cause of death, but they felt like there was something else that this person passed away from. So we've had conversations about why that may have happened, and it has a lot to do with money.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
There are a lot of people right now that don't have hope. They don't have jobs. They live in areas that are deteriorating.
I think it really changes our expectations of how stable life is going to be.
We as a people are resilient. When we go through adversity, we become stronger.
Anytime we've had a challenge, it's never been easy, right? Whether it was World War II, whether it was recovering from 9/11, whether it was recovering from the Great Recession.
Check it. You're 21 and you never had this feeling. Check your pulse, it's not the answer, just keep breathing. You're fading out, getting kinda hard to reach in. Just come with us and we'll show you how we live, because we are so young.
I'm hoping this toughens us up. I think it's toughened me up. I've become a lot more aware of my effect on the world and people around me. And it's amazing how connected we really are. And I hope that, a lot of people my age, I hope their eyes are being peeled financially.
There was a message for our generation, millennial, Gen X, whatever you want to call it, that if you do the right thing, you finish high school, you go to college, you get a good job, and you'll be stable. Some of us got there, and some of us didn't. Yeah, it makes the future uncertain. Some of the clients that I know and that I have that we're similar in age, they're really struggling right now. They don't have careers, and if they did have a career, some of them have been put on pause.
When we go into something expecting for life to go our way and things to be predictable and stable and calm, and an outcome that's congruent with whatever work we put into it, that's a really different expectation than somebody who's lived through trauma or stress. I think one of the positive things that we learn from it is a sense of resilience about who we are. So we adopt this idea that we are strong enough to overcome things, or we're creative enough to problem solve, or we can rally together with a support system and figure out a way to navigate something together.
You can't quit living, You just can't give up on life. You've got to keep pressing forward, moving forward, and make the best that you can.
Like any good crisis, COVID-19 and its wide-reaching effects created a laundry list of varying opinions on the best way forward.
We have a lot of people who have nothing, including health insurance. They're in poor health. There is little to no prospect of upward mobility. The intersection of all of this in the global pandemic, the lessons it's teaching us, I think that we're still the richest country in the world, but it really doesn't matter if you can't access the resources that you need.
One of the things I've learned is that there are a number of policies being made in regards to funding, in regards to access to health care, that unfortunately don't always include people who are implementing and practicing this health care. We're not included at the table when these decisions are being made. So that can cause like a negative impact, specifically people who are on the lower income bracket.
I don't think that they realized the personal costs, the individual costs of the shutdown, and the costs of lives that it took, costs of businesses.
But I think this will be a unique time to look back on. Where there were shortcomings, where there were ways we probably could address situations better, we need to take that and weave that into public policy and SOPs across the country. I'm hoping public health experts, public policy will be shaped for the better after this pandemic.
Thank God here in Georgia, none of us were required or forced to take people, residents with COVID. But I'm thinking in New York City, for example, where they were required to take, knowing that the resident had COVID, and to take them back into the population, that is just terrible. That is just unbelievable.
Among the biggest unknowns is the future of the restaurant and service industries. As one of the largest employers of people worldwide, its prospects will influence millions of lives in the near and long term.
It's hard to say right now, how it goes. If it is short time, it's okay. If, month or 2 months, if it is long time, then, I definitely be concerned about this.
I want to thank everyone that supported the Globe in general. So the GoFundMe especially, we had such an amazing outpouring of support. It means a lot to be well-loved and respected and taken care of in our community.
I just want to say thanks to all the customers.
If we have another pandemic in the fall, I'm sure we're going to be closed. We can't spend money that we don't have. If you're only doing 20% of your business, there's no reason to be open.
My parents are 80, and suddenly I wasn't able to see them. And it got kind of nerve-wracking. I started cross-stitching. I went and bought a God Bless America cross-stitch pattern and essentially prayed over the nation and all of the first responders as I cross-stitched it. And I had my dad in mind when I did it. And with him being at risk, if he'd have contacted it, really made me dive deep into myself about what was important and our nation and how we all work together.
I have a 93-year-old dad and 91-year-old stepmom living in Massachusetts, and they're in lockdown in their retirement home, and they've made it this far. He was a soldier in World War II. To me, it's like priceless. I couldn't put a monetary value on saving my dad's life. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. But yeah, I can't think of it that way.
If you got sick from this, I would feel horrible, because if you passed it along to your grandparents or your father or your mother and one of those passed away, it would be very difficult for you when you got married and you can't walk down the aisle with your father, or your parents never get to meet their grandchildren.
When we closed down last March and went to virtual learning, I could not be of much help to the people here in the system that were scrambling, trying to keep the thing going, and they did a yeoman's job. I was absolutely amazed at the kind of job, I want to say we did, but that wouldn't be fair to them, the kind of job they did.
Our intensivist, emergency room doctors, we had two marvelous doctors that I can't say enough about, who volunteered to man the COVID unit. Yeah, you see the heroes, and then suddenly it makes everybody better. A crisis ultimately does make people better. And it's something like this that really makes you appreciate great people.
Hide all the trouble to only where I can feel the edge.
This is not a one-size-fits-all scenario, right? So I think everybody has been impacted in some way by the shutdown, by the quarantine, by COVID-19.
How do you get caught off guard by nature? I don't know how we keep getting caught off guard by certain things. This isn't the first pandemic that's happened. So how are we not better prepared? I have what's called a wish list that I leave for Santa Claus every year. I'll put that on my wish list.
Well, in the future, we need to have a plan. You know, we need to have certain criteria available to us to help us make that kind of a decision or not. And we're going to have to start gathering that information now, because evidently we didn't have it before.
I just, worry about what we've got going on around us and how long it's going to take to deal with it and what the situation is going to be after it's run its course. I mean, it's doing damage. There's no question about it. It's doing damage as we speak on all kind of fronts. And I just hope it ends soon.
I'm interested to see what happens in the future.
We can't shut down again. It's just too much. It's going to be too much on too many people.
Only time will tell. We'll have to wait and see.
We have the tools to be able to estimate how many lives have been saved from shelter in place. That's definitely something that we can do, and actually I can tell you I already know of a whole gaggle of economists that are working to do that right now with the latest available data that we have. It's very clear to me that we'll have the data and the tools to be able to answer that question. What's not clear to me is whether or not the policymakers and society in general is going to be open to the answers, what the answers are.
Not shutting down, we would have seen even more deaths than we are seeing right now.
Could you point us to a report that would support that?
Thanks for watching the documentary. I hope you made it through it, and I really appreciate you coming here, Alan, and talking about this, because I think it's I'm very proud of the film, as I said earlier. And during the making of the film, when we started, what surprised you about what we learned?
I'll tell you one thing that surprised me about the people we talked to, which, as they just saw, hopefully, it was all different people and all different roles and professions and political opinions. I think we did a pretty good job of having some variety in there. And I was surprised how firmly they would stick to their opinion, seemingly regardless of any facts or argument that might
Human nature.
You're right. So for me, before I started, I think I had some opinions, some pretty strong opinions, but talking to so many people, and I'm not a very political person by nature, so it's ironic that I got involved in this in many ways, but talking to so many different people and being forced, because I was the filmmaker here, being forced to read the news as much as I did, and all kinds of different news, I quickly started to see all different sides, which I think informs the final film, if I think. But the people we talked to, not being filmmakers or making documentaries about COVID, they wouldn't budge from their opinion, no matter what, on both sides, left and right.
The thing that I thought was interesting is we would interview people and we would ask them about the costs, and they would their mind would immediately go to, you're asking that question, well, in my case, because I did the many interviews, although you didn't hear my voice, you're thinking about the financial costs. You selfish person.
Right.
That doesn't matter. And that wasn't the question. The question was, what are...
Right.
There are other costs.
The overall costs, yes.
Yes. That,
very few, if any, people made that connection. You're right. They would always go straight, because cost, they think dollar. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be... The one thing about the film I want to talk about a little bit is I knew it would be difficult to get the decision makers on film.
Yeah.
I knew that would be on film.
Yeah.
But the way they approach this through their actions, to this day, I am shocked that people put up with the cavalier way.
The ones that said no.
Just the cavalier way that they decided to shut down. I mean,
I see.
The shutdowns they gave. This doesn't come through in the movie, but they didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Right. It was a bit of a.
They had no concept that 3 years from now, 3 years from that time, we're going to have inflation that will probably last many years because of the extraordinary amount of spending, but also things like, for example, and this is going to happen quite frequently, or has and will, in Sri Lanka, they overthrew the government because people don't have food to eat.
Right.
Well, the reason I have food to eat is in large part with what happened with COVID. So this was always a local story. The county commissioners would not interview, but the candidates would interview.
Yeah.
So that didn't really surprise me, but their cavalier actions, because even during the course of COVID, and this is for people that don't live in Gwinnett County, is they still had a vote on MARTA.
Right.
We're 45 minutes from Atlanta, and they're talking about expanding MARTA, knowing full well that the best they're going to get is 51% of the vote. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
It's just not. They're not concerned about. I think the people, they're concerned about their status when that county goes from 1 million to people to 2 million.
Right.
So anyway, that's my opinion. I thought this was all very predictable at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So
it is interesting to talk about it now, 2+ years afterwards. But kind of back to people not budging, as soon as we started to ask questions and bring up the non-medical costs of COVID, you could see people tighten up a little bit, because either they hadn't thought about it enough to give an informed answer,
or it didn't matter.
Or it didn't matter in so much as they were only focused on, and again, I'm not.
They prioritized those other
They
costs.
prioritized the
in
other
their
costs.
mind,
So, not that those costs
they
aren't.
weren't consequential to them.
Not that those costs weren't important, of course, but the idea that someone or a group of someones would want to just know a little bit more about the other stuff, the other costs. I was surprised how that was sometimes met with a wall.
Right.
A wall would go up emotionally.
And candidates were very willing, pretty willing to talk to us. We had 4 candidates for commissioner.
Candidates, yeah.
And they were the ones that made the call.
Yeah.
2 years later, we're going to see this. I mean, this will go on for.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what
the cost
happens.
will go on for years.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see in 2 more years, in 5 years, in 10 years, how things look, and to trace it back to the year of 2020. Again, I'm not an economics master by any means, but it is interesting already to see the correlation and what's happening.
And we did not spend a lot of time talking about the benefits. We spent a little bit of time talking about the benefits. And to this, I will do interviews with politicians today and ask them to quantify the benefits, and they can't do
Of
it.
the shutdown.
Because nobody can do it.
Right, yeah.
I think that's another issue. It was conventional wisdom from the medical community.
Right, it had to be done.
That had to be done,
done.
and that's really not true.
And maybe it did need
We
to
didn't
be
get
done.
into that in the documentary, but
Not really, yeah, not really.
That there was no consensus. That was a lot of confusion.
Yes, and maybe it did need to be done, and maybe we'll find out as the years go on that it needed to be done, but just the idea that someone would question whether it needed to be done was met with a lot of resistance, and I just thought that was maybe I wasn't so surprised, knowing human nature, but you know, it was met with a lot of resistance, and I didn't think it needed to be. It's just having conversations is a powerful thing, and if you don't have them, you lose out on a lot of things. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's going to stand up in 10 years, 20 years, or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm glad we did it.
I'm very happy we did it. I like I said, the story from a filmmaking sort of very self-critical perspective, I still really enjoy watching it. And there are some things that won't age well, statistics, maybe a couple other things I'm forgetting. But from a storytelling perspective, and from what we had to work with, most people doing a documentary about a health crisis will get access to hospitals, will get access to certain things, people's lives. It was such a shutdown. We literally could only just interview people and make something from those ingredients. You know, I got a lot of...
People were very resistant to interview.
And even that, they were resistant, let alone trying to maybe get into people's homes or into emergency. Like, that was never going to happen. So it was a different way to approach a documentary because we just didn't know what we were going to do with the puzzle pieces. And I think we did a really good job with them.
Well, I think you did, Greg.
Well, with your encouragement.
Well, that's my episode today. Thanks for watching. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. And Alan, thanks for
Bill.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, bye-bye.